former Secret Service agent Robert DeProspero. He has helped protect Presidents Eisenhower, Johnson, Ford, Carter, and Reagan. Mr. DeProspero, thanks for being with us.
Security is not only whether there are posts in the White House and exactly where those posts might be, and all the operational security parts of protecting the president, but we're concerned about the relationship between the president and the agents.
Okay, now I'm going to pin you. You ready?
Yes.
Wrestle!
Oh, yes, that's so sweet.
Here comes the half now, son.
So we're going to do the toast first so everyone can actually drink, and then he's going to talk a little bit. So, this is my dad. He's my best man. I love him to death.
All right. Keep off.
I say to Bobby and Debbie, may the rest of your lives be filled with joy and wonder and love and most of all, commitment. Here, here.
Cheers.
To report. Here is the president. I almost said the president-elect, but the president and Mrs. Reagan back up now on their feet through the open roof of the car and waving to the crowd as they move down the avenue.
On the manpower assessment meeting, let me just summarize that and say that in the very beginning of that thing, I was disturbed, I was upset, I was concerned because I felt that was giving some of the people who are opposed to protection, it was giving them a license to take shots at us. But I have to say that PPD fared very well. We didn't lose anything that we really needed to keep. Everything is being accepted as far as what PPD is doing and will continue to do.
He was there for the first breath my brother and I took. He was always there for my mother. He was there for young people in our community, all while establishing legendary status as an agent in the Secret Service. Some people see the suit and the stoic face, and all they see is a Secret Service agent. Some people see former Special Agent in Charge, Bob DeProspero. Others see the demanding but caring Coach D, and some people see the playful and always loving Peepaw. But unknowingly by most, the essence of his very being focused around his family. So is it possible for someone to be a consummate professional, coach, and family man all at the same time? Let me introduce you to my father. In approximately 1920, my grandfather emigrated from a small town in Italy and became a coal miner in Granville, West Virginia. At the age of 20, he met and married my grandmother, Bessie. They raised two boys, my father and his older brother, James, or as we like to call him, Lou.
My parents were very proud of us. We had a lot of leadway. We could, they were not that strict on us. I didn't think they were that strict on us. And like I said, I don't think we really got in a lot of trouble, so that probably encouraged them to give us the freedom. My dad was a coal miner, which is something that a lot of immigrants, it was easy to get a job in the coal mines. My mother was, she tried to stay at home, but finances would get tough on us, and she would work in various places, and one of them was the 5 and 10 cent store, Murphy's 5 and 10 cent store. So we were not a very wealthy family at all. Bob and I had one bike that we had to share, so when I went any place, Bob was on the handlebars and I was pumping. We both liked the athletic stuff. Many times we would run from Morgantown back to Granville, which was like, I don't know, probably 2.5 miles or something like that. It was, I mean, sometimes you nobody stopping to pick you up, run home. Didn't take that long if you ran fast. So I think we both really focused a lot on the health issues. Neither one of us smoked. Neither one of us got into alcohol or anything like that. It had very little interest to us. We're big weightlifters. We used to go up and weightlift all the time. It was a nice pastime. Once he had a goal in mind, he never deviated from that goal. He was adamant about that goal, whatever it was. And I think he maintained that intention or that goal. He maintained that through the rest of his life. It was, I could always see that with Bob. We only had one car, and Bob and I were always competing for the car as we got older in high school. I mean, you know, if you want to go out on a date, you had to take your brother with you, you know, and he had to go with his date. So that's the way it was. They started dating Pat in high school, and he was off and on, I guess, with Pat. They had an interesting relationship.
I met Bobby when I was 13. He had a date with my sister, and so I saw him. I was sitting up on our porch, and he had brought her home from a date. You know, we were from a relatively small town, so when you dated, about the only thing you did was go to the movie. I went down to his parents' house a lot, and his daddy loved me. Yeah, both of them loved me. His daddy, Jim, if Bob would date other people, his daddy would get really upset with him. Just thought that was terrible. We continued to date through high school, and then he and I both went to college. It was
Very convenient and very, I guess, lucrative for us to be able to go to West Virginia University and being an in-state. I think when I started, I paid $45 a semester, if you can imagine such a thing. Bob was, like I say, very focused. Graduated from West Virginia in 3 years and went on for the next year on his master's degree.
His plan was to go to college, get his master's degree, and then go into the Air Force for 3 years, and then we could get married. And I didn't want to wait that long. So I said, no, I don't want to do that, you know. So we got married in December, the year that he was getting his master's degree. And then the next September, he was assigned, he had been in ROTC, AFROTC, and so we went to Travis Air Force Base. We were assigned to Travis Air Force Base.
Following his graduation from West Virginia University in 1960, my father was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force, where he served 3 years. He had planned to be a pilot. After having gone through 4 years of officer training at West Virginia University and basic training, he was absolutely devastated when he was erroneously informed by the ROTC commander that because of a few missing molars, he would not qualify for pilot training and would have to serve in some other specialty. He always saw himself as a military pilot.
He started as a second lieutenant and was first lieutenant. And Bobby wanted to stay. I mean, we talked about it, and we liked the Air. I loved being at the Air Force, and he was going to stay in, and he wanted to fly. They told him he couldn't fly because he was missing 2 back teeth.
He later found that out to be inaccurate, but went on to finish his Air Force career as a casualty services officer.
He was in for 3 years. We loved it. Very close to San Francisco. So.
I never had a knack for science, but my father loved biology and went on to be a biology teacher at Madison High School in Vienna, Virginia for about 3 years, where he also coached JV football and varsity wrestling. 2 boys on his wrestling team had fathers who were Secret Service agents. When President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in November 1963, the Warren Commission mandated that the Secret Service increase their manpower by 200 agents. These 2 men saw in my father the makings of a great Secret Service agent and recruited him. My father was commissioned into the Secret Service in 1965.
My understanding is that he had a number of wrestlers that were, that's fathers were in the Secret Service, and they noticed his enthusiasm and his, pursuit of excellence and attention to detail and things like that, and they approached him and asked him if he would be interested in something like that. And I think the last straw was, when Kennedy was assassinated, he said, I want to do that. I want to be there to protect these people.
And I remember when he came home and mentioned it to me, he said, do you think that's something that you would mind my doing? And I said, no, but I didn't know what Secret Service was.
Okay, we want to talk to you today about the United States Secret Service.
After the Civil War, more than 1/3 of the currency in circulation was counterfeit. And as the war was ending and it became clear that the federal government had to create confidence in the currency, decided that they had to do something about this, and Congress created an agency called the Secret Service to essentially combat counterfeiting. The interesting irony of history is that the legislation that actually created the Secret Service was sent to President Lincoln on April 14th, 1865. And of course, everyone knows that evening he was assassinated and never got to sign the legislation. So the legislation creating the agency that ultimately, 37 years later, would start protecting presidents was left unsigned on his desk and was signed the next day by President Johnson. And so over the next 35 or 36 years, the Secret Service was the only federal law enforcement investigative agency in the government, and did everything from counterfeiting to counter-espionage to smuggling to land fraud to public corruption. And it wasn't until 1901, when President McKinley was assassinated, which was our 3rd president in 36 years to be assassinated, they decided we better start protecting our president. And the only agency around was the Secret Service sitting in the Treasury Department across the street from the White House. And so they started protecting Teddy Roosevelt, and we've been protecting presidents ever since.
President Dwight D. Eisenhower, President Lyndon B. Johnson, Senator George McGovern, Vice President Spiro Agnew, Vice President Nelson Rockefeller, President Gerald Ford, President Jimmy Carter, and President Ronald Reagan were some of the several men that my father protected.
I met him in 1974 when I was assigned to the Vice Presidential Protective Division. He was my shift leader with both Ford and Rockefeller. And then a few years later, I came to the Presidential Protective Division where he was the agent in charge. And so I worked for him for about 2 years, maybe a little bit longer, on the Presidential Protective Division.
My first assignment was when the Vice President arrived. Bobby was whipping the shift at that point. And once the Vice President came into the holding room area prior to his speech, Bob would take the time to go to as many agents within a reasonable area to not only introduce himself, but to also give his appreciation for what we were doing. This was not something that was rather typical of that level of individual. And from that moment on, quite honestly, after meeting Bob, I made a decision on my part that this is the way it should be. This is the way that I need to conduct myself when opportunities arise, similar to what Bobby did.
Well, from that first day I met him, I knew that he was a special person. He had a presence, and I think all of us, wanted to please him, and we didn't want to let him down. And he he projected that, and I think we all felt that way. He was, I think, fundamentally a teacher. You know, if he saw something he didn't like on an advance, he would take that agent aside, and then there would be a lesson. We had an event at the Kennedy Center. Near the end of the event, the president came down to the stage to make some comments, and Bob and I were standing sort of stage left, you know, maybe 15 feet away from the president. And he turned to me and says, "Why don't we have anybody closer to the president?" And I said, "Bob," I said, "you know, I don't know, how could we be any closer?" And he looked around the curtain and he pointed to the orchestra pit. And why didn't we have an agent right there who would be right in front of the president while he was speaking? And he said that to me privately, which is when in his teacher's mode. And I thought, you know, he's right. I didn't think about that, and taught me a lesson. And I never made the same mistake again.
He was aloof, very quiet, very, very reserved. He was hard to get to know. And in fact, after he promoted me to a supervisor on the detail, I would have agents that worked for me that would say, "I don't really understand him. He never really comes forward to be close to us." And I would go back and talk to Mr. DeProspero, and I said, "You know, Mr. D, they cannot figure you out." And he'd look at me and say, "You know, and I never want them to either."
Listen, Bob was a serious guy. I said that earlier. He could be stern, you know. He could be intimidating, actually, you know. And he intimidated the hell out of agents. He didn't know that. Maybe he did, but you know, they were nervous around him. I mean, because he just, you know, he had this aura and seriousness about him. But I think he cared about the agents, and I think they knew that.
Bob has a side of him that is somewhat underneath the suit that has to do more with this sense of humor, his sense of family, his sense of caring about other people.
You know, his outward sternness was really deceiving. You know, most people looked at him as this tough guy, never smiled, always sort of wore his game face. But I think deep down he was a warm, caring, compassionate person who actually had a very good sense of humor.
Now here's a problem that no one in the entire state of Virginia wants to wrestle with.
Go, Bobby!
And no wonder. This is Bob DeProspero, a senior at James Robinson High in Springfield, Virginia. And in his career, he's wrestled 60 times and hasn't lost once. His dad, also named Bob, is with the Secret Service and was a wrestler in college himself. He's coached his son from, well, almost from the cradle.
Well, I started Bobby at a very young age. He was probably 4 years old when I just rolled around with him at home and not really teaching him anything, just kind of rolling around with him.
We're all familiar with the Little League parents who try to live vicariously through their kids, but the care shows when the father talks about the possibility of pushing his son too hard.
Yes, that is a very, very real danger. And I have tried my best not to do that. And probably the best way to do it is every once in a while just step back and say, am I pushing too hard right now? And I think another tool which I have used is to talk to Bobby and say, do you think I'm pushing too hard? And I think our greatest endorsement of that was when Bobby was interviewed at the end of the state tournament last year. And he said, my greatest strength is my father, who picks me up when I'm down and pushes me when I need a little push. So I feel that I have not pushed too much.
As you can see, this is a story about winners. Bobby wins because he'll pick from the top colleges in the country after graduation. And his dad wins because wrestling is a way he lives for his son and not through him.
During his time in the Secret Service, he also coached a boys' club wrestling team called the Fairfax Police Youth Club. There he coached my brother Bobby DeProspero, who went on to wrestle at the University of Oklahoma. Chris McCardle, the University of North Carolina. Jim Hennigan, Elon University. And Brett Gerard, George Mason University. You know, when my brother was learning how to wrestle at age 4, my dad taught me how to wrestle, so I could wrestle my brother. So I was his training mate, and we used to wrestle, you know, every other day. It definitely got a little bit old, and my father, you know, was trying to teach my brother, and he would kind of get a little bit irritated when the two of us started to joke around. But my brother and I would start absolutely cracking up. I would just lay on my brother, and my brother would start screaming, and, you know, my dad would get all upset, and we'd laugh, and that would make him more upset. But it was fun.
There was always times when, you know, Dad would pull her in and say, hey, you know, I need somebody to be able to, you know, be a dummy so that he can work these moves. I would literally laugh so hard that she could beat me because she didn't really know how to do anything, but she'd give it so much effort that I'd be laughing so hard that she'd turn me over or something, and it would like really get my dad upset that I wasn't able to just whip her, but I couldn't take it seriously. It was too funny. So when I first started, you know, the majority of the kids that were starting with me, they didn't know what I knew, so I had kind of a leg up on them. And he coached me all the way through my freshman year of high school.
Because Mr. D was the wrestling coach of the Rams Club, which was at Robinson High School. After I made the select team and started spending more time in wrestling and realized this could be a good sport for me, that's when I started to kind of recognize the top wrestlers out there, like Johnny Epperly. So Mr. Epperly was our high school wrestling coach. So Johnny was 3-time state champ, and Bobby was a 3-time state champ as well. So that's when, you know, you kind of said, oh, you know, these are the top wrestlers. Mr. D's son Bobby is the, you know, best wrestler in the state, or, you know, possibly the country.
My parents thought that wrestling would be one of the sports that would get rid of all that extra energy. So they put me into the Springfield Youth Program with wrestling, and if you look at the number of kids there, you'll know that it was a good and popular program, because you don't see that many kids in a youth club program.
I remember the first meeting, we're all sitting around and he's introduced himself, and at that point he pretty much made a very commanding statement about how we're to address him, Coach, Mr. D, Coach D. So a very authoritative, you know, presence from the get-go. Not just authoritative, but more of a inspirational presence as well.
We were competing with one of my rivals, which was West Springfield High School. I started noticing every once in a while they'd get a really sharp kid, and the kid was really, his level of wrestling was just above most other people. And I'm thinking, boy, they really are, you know, really been lucky getting these move-ins. And the house league coach, and he was also a parent of one of my wrestlers, said, John, we really need a traveling team. There's a traveling team I'd like you to see. So I went over with him, and we saw Bob's, in fact, he took me to a practice once, and I watched him there. And then I watched him in a wrestling meet. I knew where all those kids were coming from that this rival school were getting. They were his kids, ones he had been working on. Several things that really impressed me. His demeanor, the way he treated his wrestlers, the ones that happened to lose, which wasn't very often. He was very respectful for them, and he didn't browbeat them for doing something wrong. Corrections were made back in the practice room, not out in front of the public. He didn't embarrass his boys.
Coach deferred to my father in certain situations, and he respected him so much that my first year, when I was in the state finals, he asked his assistant coach to sit in the stands and let my dad sit there. So it was a nice moment for me.
I thought a lot of Bob, and I knew he wanted to be there. He and Bobby have that relationship. He's been coaching Bobby longer than I had. So I really thought he could probably do a better job than I would.
He was systematic in his approach. He drilled and drilled and drilled the moves into you. And when you got on the mat, he just wanted you to go with your instincts and do what he had taught you and what you had learned.
Bob can sit on the mat and figure out what they're doing wrong. He doesn't have to actually get in there and wrestle, which he did though, but he didn't have to. He was very calm, focused on what the wrestler was doing wrong so that he could correct it later. Occasionally when we'd have a really tough match come up and I could see some a little down, I could give good pep talks, but Bob could give better pep talks. So I would, Bob, come on in to the practice, and to my practice, and give a talk. And they'd always be lifted up.
I think that being on the road and around politicians a lot had obviously, made its way into that ability that he had to communicate as well.
He drove you to do your best and be your best, and he held everybody to very, very high standards, high ethics, values, passion for the sport, drive to do well.
But get the most out of us, I mean, to a point where, sometimes you were sick to your stomach, but the thing that makes a wrestler is that, you get to that brink where it's, in your mind, you're saying, this is hurting. Do I fight through this or do I quit? And, there have been a lot of tough guys that quit. And the people that can motivate you to get through that are the ones that really help you become a champion. When we prepare for some guy that was the greatest wrestler ever in Ohio or whatever, and I'd beat that guy, it was him and me,
The main difference that I've learned that Bobby got that was special was he learned to win, to be a champion. I think that Mr. D spent a lot of time convincing Bobby exactly how good he was, so that when he got into tight spots where he was wrestling people that were probably physically superior to him, that he was able to overcome that with the fortitude of winning.
I think that with his own character that people saw, that you saw that and you wanted to do well.
He'd get off work and get to wrestling practice, and all the parents would have to clear out of the room, and he'd strip out of his suit and put on his shorts and wrestling shoes, and they'd come back in, and I mean, he just had a plan for everything.
I don't know how he did it, but like if he was late to a practice and a parent would complain, somehow he was able to keep his composure and get through it and not be like, do you know I just got off a 10-hour flight from Iceland to be here, and you're complaining that I'm a half hour late or whatever. And the other thing too is it's not like travel soccer where you got paid coaches. He did it out of love of the sport and for the kids, so it wasn't it wasn't a paid position. He did it was all voluntary.
I remember I was sitting there talking to him about the pressures I was under, and gosh, this is this in the wrestling, and he'd say, but this is what I love doing. That wasn't his full-time job, it was his relaxation. He was getting away from the pressures that were far beyond what I was going through.
So he had two close assistants, so that if he was traveling with the detail, he would always, practice still went on, the philosophy still went on.
And I knew if he wasn't at practice that he was at work and typically with the president, protecting the president. And it would be great because I'd go home and my folks would have the news on and I'd see Mr. D on the TV, and that always impressed me.
It takes a unique person to do what he did during the day or during the night and trips and everything else, and then to commit the amount of time that he committed to us.
We went from being a low-tiered team from the time we started to, I would unequivocally say, dominating the league.
Northern Virginia team had not won a match, a state tournament, until 1960. It didn't happen again until 1980 81. Now those 2 years Robinson won it. And then the next year, 82, Woodson High School won it, which is right next door. All of those teams had DeProspero boys wrestling for them. And I think he had a huge impact on wrestling in Northern Virginia.
The 3 years that Bobby was sophomore, junior, senior year, the pendulum shifted and Northern Virginia schools dominated the state. And I credit that to Mr. DeProspero. The state champions that came out, almost every single one of them, wrestled for Mr. D. The story about us winning regionals, my high school, that year we won regionals and we had a finalist at 98, 105, 112, 119, 126, 132, and 145 pounds. So the first 6 out of 12 weight classes, my high school had a finalist. Every single one of them grew up wrestling for Mr. D.
I'm not going to say it's more, but there was a different level of respect for my father than they had for their fathers. I'm sure it was a more loving thing with their fathers, but they respected my dad a great deal because of the things that he afforded them. And let me tell you, he cussed them out and he got in their face and he made them run, and but they also saw that was not a he doesn't like me thing. It was I was talking in the middle of practice and not showing the respect that I needed to for him. They understood, why he did what he did. And because he pushed them so effectively, they were very successful, high school and college wrestlers.
He was definitely, yes, a father figure for all of us. And even Mrs. D as, a mother figure or whatever the right word is for it. I remember being at tournaments, some of the tournaments I was talking about, big tournaments, and for some reason, and they'll laugh about this, my match would always be like the last match on this mat at 11 o'clock at night. And Mr. D would, everybody else, he'd send all the other, wrestlers home, and, in my corner would be Mr. D, and up in the stands would be Mrs. D.
I was blessed knowing these young men and being able to keep a relationship with them going, even to this day, some of them. I mean, they were so close. We were so close, and I say, people ask me how many children I have, and I say, well, I have 2 children, a girl and a boy, but I also have probably 7 or 8 other sons. I mean, they're part of my life. And that's something that's very special to me.
To my parents, they were an extension of me. And because Dad was the coach and they were on the team, she was kind of team mom. And when it got to be time when they were having problems, it could be, they were having trouble cutting weight or in trouble at school, or somehow they'd land at our house.
And these kids really had some close relationships. And Bob, I know, has a lot of these guys call him, still asking him questions.
I still have it, Mr. D, by the way. And imagine, a college sophomore getting a handwritten note that says, aboard Air Force One. And this is a handwritten note from Mr. D. And it was after I had lost, so, I was sure he wanted to go a little further at NCAAs.
But you did extremely well in winning your conference and can look forward to much success in the coming years as long as you keep your greatest asset, attitude. Looking forward to seeing you this summer. If I can help you in any way, let me know. Sincerely, Coach D.
Basically, he was saying, we're always there for you. So, but, I was wrestling in college and I had lost in the NCAA tournament, and to get something that from him meant a lot.
Oh, say, can you see by the
dawn's early light, what so proudly we hail at the twilight's gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through
career of this type is very difficult, and when you get to the level that Mr. DeProspero was, it's much more difficult. So everything stopped with him. But from what I saw and the few social ventures I had with him, you know, he did very well with balancing those two priorities.
It's, you know, the Secret Service can be demanding, it can be unforgiving, it can be indifferent to your personal life. You know, but I'm not sure our lives were very different than a lot of other professionals that have to, you know, work long hours, that have to travel. You know, there is a trade-off. You know, if you want a career and you want to build a future for your family and have a good income and give them all the opportunities for their futures, you know, you have to give up something.
Sometimes I'm not sure I did a great job of it. At the end, it all came out. I'll never forget the time when my younger daughter had her first bicycle wreck when training wheels were off, and I was home with her on the local sidewalk, and I was out there with her, and when she jumped up and ran, I'm there. She ran right by me to go in the house to her mother, and then that's when I realized, wow, maybe you're not around enough for your family.
But there were also days that my daughter has said to me that she was putting on her softball uniform and I was putting on a tuxedo to go to a state dinner. So sort of a nice way to say, I wish you could have come to my softball game.
He was always really concerned about his family and children, even though his whole life was consumed by the Secret Service.
But Bob and Pat always had, in my estimation, that balance that was required that gave as much to the family as they did to their job. I mean, particularly Bobby in this case, because I could see it. Whenever Bobby could be there and be with the kids, it was with the kids and it was with family.
It's reflective of Bob himself. I mean, I think his family is a reflection of his own personality and his own standards.
Obviously, there are some things, you know, because of what Dad did, that took precedence over family. I mean, when you're on a campaign with a guy who's trying to become the president of the United States, and Dad's gone for 27 days in a row, that's different. And you know, now if it was his choice, would he do that? No, but that was his role, and he was going to do it the best possible. And you know, for him to be successful, that's what he had to do. You know, when Dad was on the vice presidential detail, or you know, the presidential detail, or he was standing post somewhere, you know, you get those 3 holidays back to back. You get Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's. And typically, you're working most of them. So, you know, there were very few times that I was with my father in my younger years at Thanksgiving. Hardly ever. Very few times that he was around on New Year's Eve, which, no big deal there. The big one was Christmas.
Bob wanted to be home with the kids when they opened their Christmas gifts. And he was working midnights. So I had to keep them in their room until he got home. So I had to manufacture a story that Santa Claus hadn't come yet and that we had to stay in our bedrooms until Santa came. And so I prepared their breakfast, and I actually barricaded the hallway so they wouldn't sneak out. And I took their breakfast into them, and the thing that was so hard was Bob wasn't going to get home until like 10:30 or something like that, 10:30 or 11 o'clock in the morning. And the kids were in the bedroom. We lived in an apartment complex at that time. And the kids were in their bedroom. They shared a bedroom. And other kids in the neighborhood were outside playing with their toys that Santa had brought.
I'd be looking out the window, seeing other kids playing with their new Christmas toys, and we hadn't spent Christmas together yet.
And so Daddy finally came, and we were able to have Christmas. But I mean, it was a little, you know, it was difficult. That was difficult. And then, of course, you know, we had breakfast, and he played with the kids again. But then he had to drive back to, you know, Gettysburg that afternoon because he was working up there.
You know, not a big deal. I'm sure Christmas Day back then, it was a big deal. But just kind of a unique memory, you know. And I will tell you, and my mother's going to kill me for saying this, but there was a time when on Thanksgiving Day we had sloppy joes for Thanksgiving, and because Dad wasn't around, and why do a big turkey and stuff, and you know.
So we had sloppy joes, and they talk about that all the time to people. It's a little embarrassing. At times it was very hard, you know, because I would have to, like when they had sports after school, I mean, I had to get home as soon as I could and take one here and one there and go back and pick them up, and you know, and I was always there on the weekends with them. But Bob was a wonderful father, and all of his spare time, when he was, you know, when he was working, I mean, it was all consuming. But when he was home and had time to spend with the children, it was good time, really good time. I mean, he never did anything for himself. He never, you know, he didn't play golf. He did nothing, and he wasn't one of these men who would come home and take naps while the kids were there. You know, I mean, he spent his time with them. People, my sisters used to say, you know, how do you do it? You just do. I knew what he was doing, that it was very important, and I had to be there for my kids. You know, it was, and I wanted to be there for my kids. You know, I knew that they missed their dad.
I didn't know any different. You know, it was just like, oh, your parents have a job, my parents have a job, big deal, you know. It got a little different, you know, when you'd come home at night and Dad wasn't there, and you'd flip on the TV and there's the vice president or president, he's standing behind him. But I didn't know any difference.
He was gone a lot, but as I've said, the time that he spent with the children was a fantastic time. And they know that now, especially. You know, the sacrifices he made for himself. He didn't, you know, he never did anything for himself. That's why it makes me very happy now that when he goes out and plays golf. I mean, because he's never had any time to himself. And I think that's wonderful.
President Reagan! Back up! Get him out! Get him out! Get him out! Get him out!
We interrupt. There's been a late development. Shots reported fired outside the hotel where President Reagan spoke a short while ago. Shots were fired apparently at President Reagan as he was coming out of the Washington Hilton Hotel this afternoon.
Because you might imagine it's somewhat pandemonium here at the White House when news of the shooting began to circulate in Washington.
Presidential limousine. So that would indicate that at least 5 shots were fired. And just the president is undergoing exploratory abdominal surgery. and that they have not yet located the bullet.
Vice President Bush, who was out of town when the shooting occurred, is now en route back to Washington, but he will not take the authority of President.
4 shots out of 6 landed, huh? And there's the face again that you saw.
Yeah. More information is turning up tonight about John W. Hinckley, Jr., the man accused of firing the shot. There is no evidence that there was anyone else in conspiracy with Hinckley.
The president was shot once in the left chest. The bullet entered from the left side. He is conscious. He is in stable condition. And that literally is all I can tell you at this time.
President?
The president.
Doctors here continue to marvel at how well President Reagan has come through this experience. Dr. O'Leary said that it fell just short of being medically extraordinary. The president walked into the hospital on his own power. He never lost consciousness and apparently joked as he was being wheeled out of surgery that I'd rather be in Philadelphia. He is a tough old man.
The elevator door opened and my boss was standing in the lobby. He says, "Have you heard the news?" And I said, "No, what news?" He said, "Well, there was an attempted assassination." The White House signal board called me and said to me, "Mrs. DeProspero, we just wanted to call and let you know that your husband is okay."
I got called out of class. Somebody from the White House called my school to have them notify me that, you know, the president's been shot, but your dad is fine, and you know, just wanted to make sure that, you know, I knew that he was okay.
The secretary told me that Bob was fine. And that's what we were really concerned about. That naturally we were concerned about the president, but we don't know the president as well as we knew Bob.
I knew right away who got hurt, and he wasn't one of them.
They had 2 people that are really stand next to the president. One stays in the White House when he's gone. They're there, and then they switch around.
Bob had actually not been with President Reagan. He had been back at the White House. So as soon as that happened, he went straight to the hospital.
He immediately went to the hospital and made sure it was secure, and was with Reagan for like the next 58 hours or something like that, some ridiculous amount of time.
Of course, when he got home, he was exhausted, but I mean, that was just one of those things that we knew where he was and that we knew he was okay, and we'd see him whenever we could.
There were multiple attempts on Gerald Ford's life, and then of course, you know, President Reagan. And, you know, there were other scares. You know, it's kind of like, how do you want to live your life? Do you want to live your life scared, or do you want to live it thinking that, you know, I'll deal with it if it happens? Yes, I knew there was some danger, but I also knew that he was so well prepared and so well trained that if something happened, there would have been nothing that he could have done to prevent that.
Having grown up with Bob as young as I was when we were growing up together, I always had a lot of faith in what he could do and couldn't do. And I really didn't worry about him. I know that sounds strange, but, and I think it was better for me. I think I would have been miserable if I'd have worried about him all the time. I really think that I was blessed not having that worry. You know, I know there are some agents' wives who just are a mess all the time. I didn't want to be that way. You know, I really didn't. And I do have a lot of faith in Bob. I know that what he does is the right thing to do. So.
After the assassination attempt on President Reagan in March of 1981, Special Agent in Charge Jerry Parr was placed on administrative leave pending a thorough investigation. It was deemed by the U.S. Secret Service and members of Congress that Jerry Parr had done an excellent job. Subsequently, he was promoted to the position of Assistant Director of the Office of Intelligence. There was complete agreement by all relevant officials that my father was the best choice to succeed Jerry Parr as Special Agent in Charge of the Presidential Protective Division. In an endorsement, Director John Simpson stated, "After President Reagan was shot on March 30th, 1981, Bob DeProspero was asked to take charge of the Presidential Protective Division, to put the special physical and technical guidelines in place to take security to a new and innovative level."
As many of you know, and I don't mind saying I'm very proud of it, I have a son who became quite an accomplished wrestler. Since I had a background in wrestling and in coaching, it was natural to start him at a very young age. By the time he was a sophomore in high school, he knew much more about techniques and strategy than I ever professed to know. But as his coach, there was one thing I had to continuously communicate to him. I told him in practice, I told him before a match, I yelled it to him during the first period, the second period, and the closing seconds of the final period. Don't let up. Because in wrestling, as in our situation, you can be 40 points ahead, and if you let up in the last 3 seconds, your opponent can pin you and you lose the whole game. That's what I'm asking of you now. Don't let up. Quite frankly, I don't ever care about being criticized for overdoing, as long as we consider security our first priority and that we achieve that priority through intense professional effort. We can't afford to let up, and I've got to demand an outstanding job from you, not a mediocre one. I've got to critique you and look closely for the mistakes, and I've got to constantly keep you apprised of the situation.
A lot of the controversy that swirled around Bob was really a result of lack of information. People didn't understand. But he never let the associated controversy of that, or the potential for controversy, really interfere with his convictions.
Oftentimes people who don't understand the inner workings of these relationships and these circumstances cannot comprehend the true value of the threat or what is evolving.
It's a very different position being in the right front seat than being anywhere else in the motorcade. And the right front seat is where the agent in charge sits. It's a very unique experience. I think Bob felt that burden. Bob felt that we should be doing everything humanly possible to prevent another assassination attempt and to protect the president as best we could. He was an innovator. We did a lot of new things. We started using tents. We put hospital agents. We did lots of things that had not been done before. And anytime you try to change something, the people who don't fully understand why it's being done have a tendency to criticize it.
A lot of people don't like Bob DeProspero. They think he was too rigid, and too difficult. But I respected him for what he did and how he went about it, because it takes a lot of, dedication to go to the level that he did. And he had a great director backing him at the time, Director Simpson, that helped him carry on that legacy and that way we did business, as I called it.
So after that assassination attempt in '81, and I was there from '83 to '87, we spent those years enhancing how we protect the president so that it would not happen again. And Bob was a leader in that effort, and I think he took some criticism for it from people who didn't fully understand why, and didn't fully appreciate the need for the kinds of things that we were doing. There's always this tension between the Secret Service and the White House staff. I mean, it just exists, and there was a certain amount of tension even in the Reagan staff. But we cooperated, and I think Bob was the innovator of that. I think he recognized that we were not there to fight with the staff. We were there to work with them as a team. Go back to the coach. He liked teams, and he treated this like a team.
But Mr. DeProspero's style took it to a level where, when you're dealing with the White House staff, I think he made a conscious effort to only deal with the Chief of Staff and the Deputy Chief of Staff, and that would be, at the Reagan era, Mr. Baker and Mr. Deaver. So he took that to a level where if you wanted decisions to be made, they were made at the highest level. Where other supervisors I've worked for and with would deal with mid-level staffers, so then you're not getting the final answer. But he somehow perfected this, where he would only deal with the Chief of Staff or the Deputy Chief of Staff of the White House. And that made our job much easier because of his dedication to just say, hey, I'm not going to have decisions made at the mid-level that tomorrow are changed. So I appreciated that very much.
That made a difference. And so we were able to do a lot of things that were innovative, yet within a framework that the staff could accept.
But Bob's relationship, as it grew with the president, was one that the confidence shown Bob by the president was one that allowed the Secret Service to maneuver and to create different levels of protection that had not been in place prior to the attempt on President Reagan.
We did some very innovative things when he was there. You know, we brought the magnetometers into the realm of physical security. And I was on a special project that he assigned me to, where I went out in the first 3 trips that we ever used magnetometers and tried to ensure that we could make it work and still not really harness the ability of the public to get in to see the president. Because that was part of the discussion that I wasn't involved in. I think Mr. DeProspero was, with the chief of staff and the deputy chief of staff. We'll let you do this, but we can't have these people standing out here for hours on time to get in. So I think it's been well known that he was probably the author of the hospital agent in the Secret Service. You know, it's like we used to go and do these advances, and we'd do hospital surveys, and we knew where the hospital was and talked to the local police and how to get there. But he finally came out and said, well, why don't we just have an agent there with a dedicated phone line put in by the, you know, by the military, the same phone system that everyone uses in that environment.
There were a lot of subtle things we changed. You know, how we worked rope lines, how we, you know, the intensity, you know, the advance agents, you know, what they, you know, what their role was in preparation and working with the staff. I think, you know, I think the relationship that was created with the staff during those years was as good as it's ever been. I mean, he felt, you know, recognized how important proximity to the president was for the detail, for the agents assigned to him, not the posts all around, but that core of agents right around the president. Bob took that very seriously. He certainly conditioned me to do that when I became an agent in charge myself. We always had to be close enough to react to the president or vice president if something were to happen. Anyone you talked to who worked for Bob, particularly on the president's detail, knew what those standards had to be. They had to be the highest possible. There was no margin for error, and he had very strict and sort of non-negotiable principles.
With his dedication and intensity came greater responsibility, greater danger, and therefore more sacrifices for both my father and the family. On October 22, 1983, Ronald Reagan was at the Augusta National Golf Course with Secretary of State George P. Shultz. That day, Charlie Harris took 5 people hostage, including 2 presidential aides.
What happened was, the president was playing golf with George Shultz and several other people at Augusta. It's a very exclusive country club. So the president was playing golf with this foursome, including Secretary of State George Shultz, and they were on the 16th fairway. And about that moment, on one of the exterior gates, and there are lots of gates all around that, a guy in a pickup truck crashes through the gate and drives his truck to the pro shop and gets out of the truck with a weapon and walks into the pro shop and took everybody hostage.
I just got on the radio and talked to Mr. DeProspero, that was actually on the golf course with the president. They kind of held him in a location away from the clubhouse for a while and asked, what do you want us to do? He said, well, I want you to set up a command post and keep me advised of what's going on. So that's what I did.
So he started demanding to see the president, fired a shot into the ceiling. So this was a serious, you know, potentially serious situation.
The president did ask to talk to the hostage taker. And we talked about it, and he said, I advise against it. I don't think he should be talking to the individual that's taken hostages.
The word quickly spread, that there was a hostage situation in the pro shop. So the photograph you see is the agents taking the president off the golf course and to the Eisenhower House, which was a private home on the grounds of Augusta, to get him in a safe place. And so they did that pretty expeditiously. And you see they've got their guns out because nobody knew if this was a diversion or what this was.
That was one time when I thought, are there more than one? And where are they? Because the president and Bob and the guys that Mr. Reagan was playing golf with were out on the course, so they were out in the open.
Eventually, the agents talked him down and he surrendered. No one got hurt. But it would have been bigger news. Really, not a lot of people know about this because that weekend, the Beirut barracks of the Marine Corps were bombed in Beirut, and we lost over 250 Marines, and we also invaded Grenada that weekend. So they were the big stories. This became just had nothing else been going on that weekend, it would have been all over the national news.
I learned from Augusta when the Secret Service conducted a little inquiry into the hostage-taking situation that we are always much better, as the President says, to negotiate from a position of strength. It is always easier to justify, to explain, and to answer questions from a position of overkill rather than weakness. In the Augusta situation, I was able to say that the degree of security at the golf course was unprecedented, and it made it much easier. That's the position we always want to be in. So, let's be strong, yet flexible. Let's be professional. And above all, let's not let up.
Getting Washington's power brokers to sit still and smile for the birdie. That's the project that White House photographer Michael Evans has taken upon himself.
Good morning, Bryant. Michael, thank you for being with us. Why did you decide to do this project?
Well, I wanted to do something more creative nature in addition to my sort of documenting the president.
The next picture we want to look at is somebody we see often with the president.
I think after the president, he's probably the most photographed man in the country. It's DeProspero, who's head of the president's Secret Service detail. Not a lot of people know his name, however.
But they see him because he's frequently at the president's side. Why take his picture?
Well, because he has an effect on the president. I mean, he's around the president a lot.
But I know that my father and President Reagan had an extremely close relationship. The photos that were taken in a casual type setting, you can see the admiration and respect that they had for one another. And they had fun together, being up at President Reagan's ranch, riding horses, going down and cutting down trees, that type of thing. They had fun together when they weren't in a type of professional, setting, when it was just President Reagan on his own home turf.
And he thought he was the greatest there ever was. And of course, I knew that, so maybe that influenced my thoughts about him too. And when I met him, I mean, he obviously was very personable. He obviously was very persuasive in what he wanted to do. And Bob often told me a lot of the jokes that he told Bob.
As part of my job in the Secret Service, I had a trip out to the West Coast when President Reagan had an office in Century City. And so it was great. It's something that I'll never ever forget because it was a chat, and President Reagan brought up my father and asked me how he was doing, and told me some stories about he and my dad. So it was great.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tom Quinn, and I will be your master of ceremonies tonight. Welcome to the retirement dinner for Bob DeProspero.
My father had been in protection for over a decade. After being a special agent in charge, he went on to be the assistant director of training and retired 18 months later.
Your Honorable James A. Baker III.
Thank you very much, John. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight to honor an individual who's brought real honor to his country, a man I'm proud to count as a solid friend of mine. Bobby DeProspero gave over 20 outstanding years to the United States Secret Service. He faithfully served presidents, vice presidents, and presidential candidates during every administration since that of Lyndon Johnson. Bobby D is one of the best. His dedication is unsurpassed. President Reagan once said of the United States Secret Service, "I think all of us should give thanks to God that there are men in this society who are willing to take these jobs." Bobby DeProspero is one of those men, and he is our friend. It's now my pleasure, on behalf of the United States Treasury Department, Bobby, to present you with a rare honor, the Meritorious Service Award.
Winston Churchill, who happens to be a favorite of mine, made a comment about duty. His comment was that it's not enough that we do our best. Sometimes we have to do what is required. I think that anybody who knows Bob knows very well that he not only did his best, he did what was required. And he did it in a way that always exemplified the very best in professionalism and the very best of the Secret Service. Bob DeProspero happens to be a person who you meet once in a lifetime.
I can't imagine what the responsibility would be like to be responsible for the life of the most important and most great man in the world. But I wonder what it would be like to leave that each day and come home and become the most important father in the world. And the message that I would have for you this evening is that Bob DeProspero is an outstanding father. My relationship with you is one of admiration because you were able to take the many facets of life and put them together in a very important way. I know how proud you are of your family, and I know how proud the family is of you. I'm proud to be from West Virginia, your state, and to have known you, and to have been allowed to be a part of this program this evening. A wonderful, wonderful gentleman. Thank you.
In 1985, he was selected as the West Virginia Italian American of the Year for his lifetime achievements.
Had Robert DeProspero been in town on business, the crowd would have made him nervous. But instead of looking from side to side, always on guard, the man who guards the president had the Italian Heritage Festival on his mind today. DeProspero is the 1985 recipient of the Outstanding West Virginia Italian American Award. DeProspero's role of protecting the president helped in the selection process. But his is a heritage that values family, duty at home as well.
I have absolutely the utmost in the way of support from my family, certainly beginning with my wife, because she's obviously had to spend a lot of her time alone, and of course from the family. But my wife and I both decided that as a result of my absence, we would certainly try to work doubly hard at spending time with the kids when we're not working.
It's a festival that they have. It's Italian American Festival, and they do give this award to, the Italian American of the Year. And so he was going to go up there, and it was a couple-day event where they had, the first night it was a banquet, and he was going to, give a speech. And then the next day there was going to be a parade, as well as the actual giving of the award in the middle of the town. And so he was just honored beyond belief.
Because of his accomplishments at West Virginia University and throughout his career in the Secret Service, they chose him. And it was a great honor, and one that he's deeply proud of.
DeProspero once said of himself, "I'm not overly intelligent. I certainly am not a suave person, and I don't have the greatest personality, but I think I have the ability to lead men."
Bob, had such I think, incredible influence on the standards and our procedures and our policies. I'm still using some of the things I learned from him. And it has served me pretty well. So I was grateful, and I'll always think back to that first time I met him in 1974 on the Ford detail. We were actually literally having breakfast in a hotel before we went on duty. And I can remember sitting there meeting him, and I'd heard about him, but I'd never met him before. And I had no idea at that moment, what a profound effect he'd have on me for the next, 10 or 15 years. It was, and still today, actually. And I will always be grateful to him for that.
There was no one else more committed to protection than Mr. DeProspero. I learned so much from the man as far as protection. Even later in my career, when I went back as a supervisor on the vice president's detail, people would look at me, what I was trying to accomplish there, and go like, well, this is the vice president. I said, well, I only learned it one way. I learned to do it right or not to do it at all. And that's what Mr. DeProspero taught me.
So Mr. D, I mean, in my eyes, was really my mentor. Everything from, seeing how he led the wrestling club, how he took his career seriously, how he believed in his family and loved his family. He taught me how to lift weights. He helped me get my first job. He fitted me with all of his suits. For my first job, he helped me write my resume. He showed me how to tie this tie, the double Windsor knot. I'm like, how do you tie these knots? It's rare to meet someone that is just absolutely well-rounded in every aspect of their life. Health, fitness, intelligence, respect, leadership. It's just he's just an amazing guy. He enjoyed helping me and making me a better person. I think that was rewarding to him. He's that type of guy. He's just, I don't know what it was about me, but he said, hey, this kid's, gonna be a good kid one day, be a good guy one day, and I'm here to help him. So
when you're growing up, you look for people to admire or to model yourself after, and that's what, when I look at Mr. D, he gave us, all of us, a role model that we could look up to, and if we're anywhere close to what he was, then we're gonna do all right.
It's nice to know that, how it is. Sometimes your friends think parents are stupid, and I don't want to be around them. They're lame. It's not the way it was. It's still not the way it is. My friends still say, hey, let's go out and hang out with your parents in Arizona. So, I mean, we don't have enough battery in that thing to talk about the great memories that I have with him. At some point in time, you realize he's not just lucky, with all that stuff. It's because he's earned it, and he's worked for it, and, there aren't enough minutes in the day to be as much of a perfectionist as he is. So, I attribute a lot of my successes to growing up in that environment.
Undeniably the patriarch of our family. He is a large presence with us, and I want my son to be around him as much as he can be. I want to be around him as much as I can be. We wouldn't be the people that we are without his leadership.
We all turn to him for advice, for comfort, for, just guidance a lot of the times. He can really help in any type of situation because he has had so much life experience. He's able to, even say in times where, we feel like our world is just kind of crumbling in around us, he's able to say, no, it's okay. I am definitely his little shadow when he's around. I always, I tell everybody, I just want to sit down and have him record everything that he's ever done in his life and ever learned in his life, because I just think he's wonderful.
I must have been really, really little, maybe 3 or 4, but in their house in Virginia, they had a railing outside. I vividly remember him, lifting me up and going to lean me over that railing. And there just so happened to be a wasp's nest or a beehive or something under that railing. And just the second he lifted me up, they started stinging him, and we had been outside forever, and so he had no shirt on, and they were just stinging him everywhere. And he, did not waver and did not drop me or like throw me over the railing or anything like that. He very carefully bent down and placed me there, and I just remember thinking, even being so little, thinking, wow, he must love me because he just got really hurt.
My favorite thing of Papa is he always will spend time with us, no matter what. I love you, Papa.
I love him to death. I think he's a wonderful man, and I think not too many individuals that can live up to the caliber of man that he is.
I could never have dedicated my life to the lifestyle that he had to live under as a Secret Service person. But yeah, was I proud of Bob? Sure, absolutely. I'm sure he was proud of me. We did well. We did well.
I feel that Bob is very special. I think he was put on this earth to do something very special, and he did. With not only with the Secret Service, but also with what he did with the boys. The coaching. I mean, those kids. A lot of the kids' lives have changed drastically, and they've become such nice young people. And I think that.
March 24th, 1986. Dear Bob, it is a distinct pleasure to send warm congratulations on the close of your distinguished career with the Secret Service. I could not let this occasion pass without extending my personal thanks for the tireless dedication and consistent professionalism you have displayed throughout your tenure as the Special Agent in charge of the Presidential Protective Division. Having spent many, many days side by side with you both in this country and abroad, I can speak with authority of your skill and complete devotion to duty. You reflect great credit not only on the Secret Service, but on the entire law enforcement profession as well. Nancy and I wish you and your family every success and happiness in the coming years. From the bottom of my heart, thank you and God bless you. Sincerely, Ronald Reagan. Very few men have so greatly impacted the lives of so many. Agents, wrestlers, and family have all come to the realization of what my father really is. A man who has served his country with distinction, an unselfish mentor, and the ultimate provider.